WordPress Accessibility Day 2023. Accessibility Pitfalls of WordPress Menus. With speaker Deneb, Pulsipher, Captain Accessible, Sea Monster Studios. This presentation was recorded September 28th, 2023.
So, as it's exactly 10 UTC, we're going to start right on time, trying to be the pseudo-German, aka Dutch person that I am. Welcome to WordPress Accessibility Day 2023. My name is Joost de Valk. I'm a partner at Emilia Capital, the CTO at PostStatus, and many more things, but more importantly, I'm your MC for this session. First, we have a couple of housekeeping notes. Please feel free to add your questions in the Zoom Q&A section. You'll find Q&A in the bottom of your Zoom screen. Add your questions there. We'll answer them at the end of the session. And of course, use the chat to connect with other attendees. That being said, I'm very excited to introduce our next speaker, Deneb Pulsipher, who will talk to us about the accessibility pitfalls of WordPress menus. Deneb is better known as Captain Accessible among his colleagues at Sea Monster Studios, a small development shop based in Seattle, Washington. Entrusted with the critical role of ensuring that all websites produced by Sea Monster Studios meet accessibility standards, Deneb has developed a profound interest in simple and intricate methods that can enhance website usability for all visitors. His fascination lies in how minor adjustments by web developers can make a world of difference for users, regardless of how they access a site. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Deneb. Take it away.
Thank you. Okay, so here in my first slide, I'll just note that I do have a QR code that links to the slide deck. So if you're interested in getting that in the easiest way possible, you can scan this code. All right, so let's talk about why it's so essential to make sure that your menu, your navigation menu, is accessible. So on this slide, I have a picture of a person sitting in a rowboat looking tranquilly over this peaceful scene of this lake that he's floating on. There is, however, one thing notably missing from this picture, and that is any oars. So this person has no way of actually moving around this this locale, and that's kind of so it's going to be problematic for the person coming. And if we say that your site is akin to this this scene, your menu is going to be those paddles. It's going to be the way that your visitors have of moving around your site in the way that they need to. And so without a paddle, you're in trouble. Getting around is hard without a good navigation menu that works for everybody. So often, people put a lot of thought and effort into making sure that their navigation menu works pretty well, and that it does the things that they want it to. But if it's not accessible, then a whole segment of their audience isn't able to use it in the way that they are intending. And so we got to make sure that that they can do that. Now, internal page links can work if you disregard the ability to use the menu. So you can direct people around your site through just internal page links. That's an okay thing. The footer navigation is almost always accessible because there are no drop downs or complications as far as that goes. And many people are coming from Google anyhow, so they'll come to the precise page that Google thinks they want, which often it is true. However, in the final analysis, you do want people to stay on your site, and in the end, it is a numbers game. What do I mean by that? I mean that with your visitors on your site, you're in a race against time. So here's some numbers to look at. 54. What is that? Well, 54 actually is the average number of seconds spent on a page. So less than a minute is, I guess internet wide, what the length of time that people are actually going to be absorbing a page worth of information before they're looking to go to the next page, right? Next number, 5 to 7. Well, what's that? That's the average number of pages visited per session. So they'll come onto your site, and they'll stay on your site for an average number of 5 to 7 distinct pages of your site. Well, so you hope that you can get them to the right place within those 5 to 7 pages. Let's look at the average depth of your best converting call to action. So on one of your pages, it's what you want them to get to. How many pages do they have to go through to get to there? And I don't know the answer to that. Probably nobody knows the answer to that. It would be a very difficult number to figure out. But what is certain is it's almost certainly not the first page that they land on. So you are going to want to provide people with a good way to get around your site. Hence the menu, but it needs to be accessible so that all your visitors can use it. I've got my links to where I got this information. And then my next slide says menus may save bounces, right? One of the big benefits of having a good menu, a well-designed menu, is that it'll save bounces. So people won't come to your site, not find what they're looking for, and jump off to another place. They'll actually spend some time in your site. Why? I say that your menu is kind of like an old friend. It makes people feel comfortable on your site, makes them feel like they know what's going on and they can understand things. But this is only if they can use your menu well. Your menu can be a springboard into the other areas where they will actually find the things that you're hoping that they will find. Your menu needs to avoid some common problems. And I think a lot of people don't. I mean, the menu is kind of, it was given to them. It was part of the theme or whatever that they're using to develop the site, and they don't think a lot about it, but there are some common problems that your menu needs to avoid. So what problems might be lurking in your WordPress menu? On this screen, I have a picture, a background image of a crocodile, just kind of looking at out from the half concealed under the water. Oops, let's see. So what problems might be lurking in your WordPress menu? Okay, so problem number 1. Your menu might only drop down on hover and not focus or click. What this means is that if you have a drop-down menu, I have a couple images here of my favorite site for Black history, which is blackpast.org, which I've worked on. When I started working on it, their menu dropped down on hover, but not on focus. So I have this image of their website and someone hovering over the African American history menu item, and it drops down, and we see this drop down with a lot of secondary menu items in there. And then the second image I have is showing the same menu, but now it has the focus indicator on that primary menu item, but nothing is dropping down, right? And with many websites, this is what you get. You can see that you can tab into the primary menu item, but it doesn't drop down, and so you can't have access to all of these secondary menu items that you've put in there for a good reason. So a little closer look at this. Once again, this is what it looks like on hover. So if you're hovering over this this category, all these drop downs. The second one, well, I guess we missed the second. The second one is just the same. It's just a closer look. Okay, the next slide here goes through why this is a problem. Well, who it affects? If you're able to tab into the primary menu items, but not the secondary menu items, then this affects keyboard users, because now all those people who are navigating because they can't use mice, maybe their mice are broken, or they've got tremors, and so they can't have the fine motor control to actually use a mouse to get around the site. Or people just who prefer to navigate by keyboard. There are many reasons why people might, and so there's a certain group, certain portion of the population that will just navigate your site by keyboard, and so having your menu only dropping down on hover influences them or stops their ability to use the menu. Also, it could affect switch device users. Those are users who have a switch device where they only are using one button to either advance or to select. Typically, that will move their focus, but it won't necessarily move their cursor or their pointer, and so they wouldn't get the drop down. Again, switch device users might be people with no fine motor skills or limited, people with cognitive disabilities who it helps to just have an option of yay or nay, yes or no. Sometimes this will also affect screen reader users, depending upon the screen reader setup. So if it's set up for the virtual cursor to follow the focus, then they might be fine with your drop down on hover. But if it's not set up that way, then they might also have trouble using the menu. And we had an interesting little interruption by a screen reader. But yes, so that could be problematic. Okay, our second problem here. If the dropdown works on focus, but there's no ability to pull the menu back up. So what happens if this is the case is that then when you tab into the menu and it drops down, your next tab would be to the submenu item, and you'd have to go through that, which is okay if there are only a few submenu items. With Black Past, I have this program that'll kind of enumerate how many tab stops are on the page, and as you can see, to get to the bottom of this menu, you actually have 87 tab stops. So if you want to get to this the International Advisory Board in the About Us menu, you'd have to tab 87 times to get there, which is problematic. If you have the ability to suck that menu back up, then you don't have that problem. All right, so who this affects? Once again, keyboard users, switch device users, sometimes screen reader users. Why it's a problem? It probably exponentially increases the amount of time needed to tab through the menu. So as I said, in this particular case, they would have to tab 87 times, which isn't likely to be something that anyone is going to be willing to do. So making sure that you can pull up the menu that you have dropped down is pretty important. Usually that's going to be through a control, like on this site, it was supposed to be this little plus icon to the right of the menu, the main menu kind of item. But that had been disabled at some point by the site, and so it wasn't working on Black Past. Now I do have a caveat here. Why this is a problem. I say it probably exponentially increases the amount of time needed to move through a menu. but it would not increase that amount of time if you implement arrow key navigation such that you can go down into the menu and then press the right or the left arrow key to go to the next main kind of menu item. You wouldn't necessarily need to have a distinct control to pull the menu back up if you can do that. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later on, but problem 2 is problematic. Problem 3. If your drop-down menu, the items in your menu that drop down don't have ARIA expanded attribute. Now, the ARIA expanded attribute is just something that helps assistive technology users, primarily screen reader users. So when they move their focus into the, in this case, I'm looking at BlackPast's site again, if they move it into the African American history menu, main menu item, they would hear, if it was in the collapsed state, if it wasn't expanded, they would hear African American history link collapsed, and that would indicate to them, oh, there's a submenu here. So the next, if I expand this menu, the next place I go to is going to be inside the menu. Or if they come into here and they hear African American history link expanded, they're automatically going to think, okay, so this is a drop down menu, and I'm moving into it with my next key press. If they don't get that collapsed or expanded notification, then they will end up thinking, oh, I'm here in African American history. My next stop is going to be the next main menu item. But after they get through, 6 or 7 of these unrelated or non high level, I guess, menu items, they're going to start thinking or realizing that this may not be what they think it is. But if they have that ARIA expanded attribute, it's going to work. Who else this affects? Refreshable Braille device users. So people who can't see and can't hear. Why this is a problem, once again, they won't understand the menu and where they are in it. So they'll have an erroneous conception of what's going on and might get frustrated after going through 20 things that they think are primary menu items that are actually submenu items. People who or if your menu drops down on click of like this, for example, if this African American history would drop down as you click on the African American history thing, the screen reader user may not know what's happened at all, right? If you don't have an expanded or contracted state, they'd click on it and it would drop down, but they wouldn't have any indication that anything has happened. They'd think maybe something had just gone wrong and they're no place now. So that could be problematic. All right, kind of a sidebar. The best practice for menus I've kind of decided or found is if you have 5 to 7 menu items, just put them in the main menu, right? Don't worry about having drop downs at all. And that's highly accessible because then you don't have to worry about ARIA expanded. You don't have to worry about does it drop down, does it not? So that's super great. But if you have 15 to 20 or more drop downs, you want them, or 15 or 20 or more items that you want to fit into your menu, you definitely want drop downs. And you will need to make sure that the ARIA expanded attribute is there so that the drop down works for people. Okay, and here we go with our next slide, assessing the problem. So the next section. So how to assess. So if you are working on your web page or someone else's, and you want to see or assess whether the menu that's in there is accessible, well, use a keyboard. Start out that way. So you're going to hit tab. You're going to tab right through the skip link that'll probably pop up first or second. And then you should be able to tab into the actual menu. And you're just going to start tabbing through it. If you get to a menu item that is a drop down, does the when you tab to it, does it drop down? If it doesn't, you got trouble, and you're going to have to figure out how to fix that. We'll talk about how to fix it in just a minute. So you're going to see if the menu drops down. You're going to see if there's a way to make it pull up. Next, you want to assess with the screen reader, because you can use the standard arrow navigation on the screen reader to go forward through the menu and listen for your screen reader to say collapsed or expanded, which indicates to you that it has the collapsed or the RA expanded attribute on it, like it should. And finally, you probably want to inspect. So use your browser inspector to inspect an element and see what it goes. Let's take a closer look at this. Okay, so if you were to inspect, this is using Chrome, but Firefox and the other browsers are usually pretty similar. So you'd put your pointer over the item that makes it drop down. You'd right click and choose inspect, which would open up your element inspector here. What you're looking for to make sure that the menu is dropping down and that the RA expanded attribute is there, you're looking to see here on this element if there is this RA expanded equals true. As you can see here, it wasn't this way initially, but I did remediate BlackPass so that it does have the RA expanded equals true. And as you can see a little farther down, this next one, Global African American History, that menu item, which is also a dropdown, has the RA expanded equals false. You want to make sure that when the Global African History menu item drops down, that these two swap. So that your first one would say false, RA expanded false, and your second one would say RA expanded true. If that's working, you're golden, at least in this aspect. So that's good. All right, let's take a look at in preparing for this talk, I looked through 15 theme sites of WordPress themes. So I looked through, I went to the popular themes, and I tried to find sites that were built with those themes, and I assessed them to see if they had any of these three problems. And here's what I found. It was and then I also looked at 5 other big ones, Google and Merriam-Webster and a few more. And here's what I found. Of these 20 websites, the bad news is 9 of 20 of them did not drop down on focus. They only dropped down on hover. So once again, this is gonna be bad for keyboard navigators, for some screen reader users, and that's almost half of them. So that's a huge number of sites that didn't work great. Of the ones that did drop down on focus, 7 of those, so 7 of 11, had no way to pull the menu back up. So once again, that's going to be a problem too. And then of these 20 websites, 15 of them had no RA expanded attribute. So poor for screen reader users. The good news is there were 4 sites that worked perfectly. Google had very limited drop downs, but the one they had worked. Merriam-Webster. So those were kind of the industry sites. I don't know if they're probably most certainly not built with the WordPress, but they did work. And also the Elementor demo site worked perfectly. It had no problems. And the Astra theme demo site worked perfectly. So there is some hope. It can be done, right? They're out there, the sites that work fine, but most sites, at least that I looked at, did not work as desired. So what solutions can you implement on your WordPress menu? Let's take a look at it. Well, you can do some PHP remediation. What you'll want to do is you'll want to go in and modify the NavWalker class that you'll find in the PHP, excuse me. I have an image here of kind of a screenshot of this Walker nav menu in some PHP code. It's complicated, it's confusing, and so though it's probably the best solution because it's getting at the real heart of the issue, it's also probably beyond what the average WordPress developer is capable of. And it's definitely beyond the scope of this presentation. So if you want to do it, I have a link here. You're welcome to follow to the WordPress docs that talk about this Walker nav menu. You can also, there are ways that you can completely swap it out. I haven't found code that you could swap in for it or instructions on how to do it to make sure that you're changing your menu to actually be one that is accessible, but presumably there is a way to do that. But let's look at some other solutions that are probably more likely helpful for you. So the solution for drop down only on hover. So if it only drops down when you hover, usually you can fix this with just some CSS remediation. So adding something to the style sheet. So you're going to make sure that the menu drops down on focus by hovering. So when you'll inspect an element, and then you're going to look here in the style, in this force element state. You're going to click the hover, and you're going to figure out which one of these items is actually causing the on hover for it to drop down. And so by clicking and unclicking hover with different items selected here in the inspector, you'll figure out which one of those is triggering the drop down. Then you can scroll down in the rules here to figure out what's changing, figure out where in the style sheet it's changing it. And then if you just add a hover declaration to that, add a focus declaration to the hover declaration that's already there. So let me see if I got all my things. Use the browser dev tools, add a focus declaration to it, and you should get it. Okay, next, for the missing aria expanded, you're going to need to do some JavaScript remediation. So use JavaScript to modify the proper aria attributes, which does add some weight to your site's load time, right? So anytime you add JavaScript, that's one more resource, and it will take a little bit longer. So that's a consideration, but if it's adding this essential ability, it's, I think, definitely worth it. This only works if visitors have JavaScript enabled in their browsers, and 1.2% of internet users don't have JavaScript enabled, which is actually a huge number of visitors, 62 million, right, a year, that don't have JavaScript enabled. So it's just something you're going to have to deal with, I guess, or accept that it's not going to work for everyone, unfortunately. But how do you do it? If you're missing this aria expanded attribute, well, you got to select the element. And I have on the right side of this screen, I've got an image of the BlackPass site with the JavaScript console open. And you can see some of the things that that I wrote into here that you can try it first in the JavaScript console. And then if it works there, then you can add it to a resource, right? A JavaScript file that is called throughout the site. But you got to select the element and then use the set attribute method to set the ARIA expanded to false before it is dropping down, and true when it does drop down. You're going to test, and test, right? In the console, in a dev environment, in the live environment, make sure that this works the way that you expect it to or that you want it to. All right, so a little closer look at what this looks like. So you can see the code that I used here, or that I tested in the console. But in addition to setting the initial ARIA expanded attribute of ARIA expanded equals false, you'll also need to add an event listener on focus that sets the ARIA expanded attribute to true, and another one on the blur, so another event listener on blur that sets it back to false. So making sure that the ARIA attribute or ARIA expanded attribute is modified dynamically on the fly as the states of this change. So you can do something like this: drop down items I dot add event listener on focus, and then use your function that adds or takes away the proper attribute. So this is kind of scratching the surface, not going deeply into how to do this with JavaScript, but probably you already know that bit. All right, let's talk about this enhancement that I mentioned earlier of the arrow key navigation. All right. If you have menus that drop down, I've got an image of the BlackPass site once again because it has implemented this. In fact, this is why it has. You'll see that it's an image of somebody in one of the menus, but there's a little message up above the menu that says use the arrow keys to navigate the menu. To enter the page, use the right arrow key from the last menu item or press escape at any time. So what arrow key navigation does is it allows visitors who tab into the menu to move their focus around it with the arrow keys, which kind of makes it so that you don't have to worry about having a way to suck the menu back up necessarily, because you can always just go to the right, go to the next menu over. How to do it? It's not a simple process, but basically you add key press event listeners while the menu item has focus, and you push the focus depending upon those the key presses of the right and the left arrow key. You push the focus to the desired element. So it does require JavaScript with all the caveats that requires. It is, however, helpful for keyboard navigators. It's not necessarily super helpful for all other users like screen reader users. There's a way to make it work, but it's a little bit convoluted, and so it may not be helpful to them, but it's not problematic to them either. So it doesn't block their ability to at least go through all these menu items if they want to. It just makes it easier for keyboard navigators and not worse for others. Okay, so the easy way to do this, I would say, is use the Crow's Nest plugin, which is available on the WordPress plugin directory. And also I have a QR code here. It's a plugin that enables this. arrow key navigation on the menus. There are a few caveats. This plugin only works if the drop down on focus is already enabled. So you gotta fix that first, and then oh, there goes my light. And then you'll set this plugin up by targeting various elements, doing the CSS I guess styles that would target various elements. Okay, so question. Remember that person on the lake that we looked at the very first slide? Wouldn't you rather have this one paddling around your lake? Notice he's got he's ready to stay, right? This guy, he's got his fishing tackle, his fishing pole, and he's got these oars, and so he is able to paddle around the site. He's going to stay. That's what you want to do with your navigation, right? Give your visitors the proper paddles, the way to get around your site, and they will stay longer. So you want to make sure that your menu drops down on focus as well as hover. Do this by adding or adjusting your CSS to add a focus trigger to your hover styles that make that happen. Make sure that your menu has a mechanism to suck back up for keyboard and screen reader users. So when it drops down, you want it to have a way to come up, or else they'll be tabbing through the entire drop-down list, which isn't great if it's extensive, right? Or you can add arrow key navigation, as we've talked about. Make sure that your menu has the proper ARIA attributes so it can be understood by screen readers and their users. Okay, so that's kind of the final takeaway. If you need a little extra help with your menu, let's connect, right? I've got my LinkedIn link there, my email address. So if you notice that your menu isn't working like it needs to, let me know, right? Hit me up and we'll talk. Okay, and I guess that's all I've got.
Thank you, Deneb. That was excellent, actually. If you could stop sharing your screen, and people might be able to see you a bit better.
For sure.
We have a ton of questions to go through, which is good. So
Okay.
I'm gonna try and go through them in a bit of order as you went through your presentation.
Okay.
You talked about the number of tab stops, and I can totally see why 87 tab stops to get somewhere is a bit much. What would you recommend as a number that is like still acceptable?
Yeah. So I have thought about this quite a bit, because I made this plugin, and so I have to decide, well, is it worth it to install this plugin on various client sites? And so I've decided that if there are 15, if it takes, so a menu has maybe 6 main drop downs, right? Main menu items. But if they're if they're like 15 sub menu items, then that's probably about where I start thinking, okay, yeah, we gotta enable this arrow key navigation.
Okay, perfect.
But it's that's my personal opinion.
Well, no, but it's a good number to go from. I can see how you'd sort of get to that, like that area of that range of number. Okay, for everyone listening, if you have your own questions, please look in the bottom of your Zoom screen. There's a Q&A button there. You can add your own questions. That makes it a lot easier for me to see your questions and to actually go through them with Deneb. We've just answered the first one, but we're not done yet. Andrea Fercia, a former colleague of mine, very dear to me, was actually asking, what tool did you use to count the tab stops in the menu?
Oh yeah. Let me see. I'll pull that up so I can figure out what that is. What was it?
You know what? You'll get to share that link later on in the
I will.
accessibility in the WordPress Accessibility Day Slack.
Okay, I will put it in Slack. I'll look it up and I'll put it in Slack for sure.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Johan is asking, is vanilla JavaScript a good way to alter the navigation menu with regards to tabbing?
Well, like I said, the best way is to actually, change the whole menu out with PHP, to do that nav walker class. However, the technical ability needed to do it that way, I think, is much more substantial than changing it with JavaScript. And so although it's not great to be dependent upon a client-side service like JavaScript that could be disabled on people's browsers, though that's not great, I think it's worth it, and it's better than nothing. If you, particularly if in your accessibility statement you say, there are some, in fact, you could mention your menu, call it out in the accessibility statement and say, hey, our menu works best if you have JavaScript enabled, or just put that generally in your accessibility statement someplace. Our site works best with JavaScript enabled. Then they at least know, oh, if I want the best experience, I'm going to enable JavaScript, even though usually I don't need it. Maybe for this site I'll have it.
Yeah. So, and your PHP remediation, you mentioned it takes too far for this presentation, which I understand, but do you feel that that's something that should actually be in WordPress core?
As I understand it, each theme puts in their own navigation menu with their own PHP nav walker class.
They shouldn't.
So I think it would be helpful if WordPress would put like a fully accessible example code, or kind of thing that that developers could start with a basis. But I don't know too much about that side of things.
No, that's absolutely fine. I was actually talking to our tech guy, Jonathan Bossinger, about like, hey, shouldn't this be in core? We'll have a look at after this, like, where should this live? I think there's quite a few people listening that may have opinions on that, but I maybe we can make this a bit better for everyone and a bit easier, because I'm fully with you. If people have to start writing navigation walker classes, that's a bit too much for most things. Another question from Karen Soika. Karen, I don't know how to pronounce your name, Karen, sorry. Have you tested the current standard theme 2023, and do you have any experience with that?
No, I haven't. That wasn't one of the ones that I did. In fact, if you get my presentation, you can click on that chart and it'll take you to the spreadsheet that I used that has listed all of the ones that I tested. But that wasn't one of them. I'd certainly be interested in it if you're curious. Hit me up or put that request in Slack, and I'd definitely be interested in looking at that.
Yeah, we should definitely also look at the new default theme being developed for WordPress to see, like, hey, is it doing this well? I think it's a good thing to think about. Leah Root is asking, do you have any recommendations for accessible mega menu designs or plugins like that?
I don't. So I know that, like I said, one of the themes, or not really theme, but one of the things, I guess it was a theme. It was the Hello Elementor theme, but with Elementor, I know they've got all sorts of things, and so I know that their default theme did work perfectly. so their demo theme did. So that would indicate to me that probably if they have a mega menu option, that it's probably going to work, but I haven't tested it. But now, after having gone through my presentation, you know, gotten the slides and stuff, you are empowered to test it yourself. Or hit me up on LinkedIn or on just email or on Slack or whatever, and I'll go through it with you.
Perfect. It's a great offer. I would definitely take you up on that if I were any of these people. The last question I currently have open, if you have any more, don't hesitate to add them, is from Jerry Ong. What's your take on accessibility of mega menus that could have drop downs with varied layouts and content? Avoid mega menus or just apply the same accessibility techniques?
So I'm not a huge fan of mega menus. However, I think they're okay. If you have the, you know, if you make sure that they avoid those 3 problems that I talked about, screen reader users would be able to get into them and go around them. As long as keyboard users would as well, as long as there's a way to suck that mega menu back up. If you make a keyboard user tab all the way through, you know, this vast array of options in the mega menu, it's going to be kind of problematic, and that's not a great usability feature, which is one of the reasons why I don't like mega menus too much. But you know, as long as it's showing when it's expanded, as long as you can get in there with just tabbing and not necessarily needing to hover over it, then I think mega menus can be okay.
Yeah, clear. Another anonymous attendee is asking, what about menus on mobile? All the examples shared were for desktop. Is there any difference? Does that change the perspective on any of this?
So that is actually something I should have brought up in the presentation. You do need to make sure that that your menu works both in desktop and mobile, with for keyboard navigators and screen reader users, because it is different. Typically, your mobile menu would have a single drop down. I mean, as you know, it's the hamburger button that you'd click on, and that would drop the menu down. But you still do need to make sure that it has the proper ARIA expanded attribute, and that it can work on keyboard focus, because sometimes people are going to be just have a really narrow browser, and they may still be using their keyboard to navigate. And so you do need to check the mobile menu as well. So apply the same standards to make sure that the mobile menu works as well.
Clear. Well, with that, we've come to the end of our questions and thus the end of this session. Thank you again, Deneb, for your excellent presentation. Thank you all for attending this session with Deneb Pulsipher. You can continue the conversation in chat or on social media using the hashtag WPA11YDay or WPAD 2023. We also really appreciate it if you go to the WP Accessibility Day website to provide anonymous feedback to our speakers so that they can learn what they did right and what they can do better next time. And while you're there, you can enter to win a t-shirt. Stay tuned for a practical guide to automated accessibility coming up next with Mark Stedman at the top of the hour, which is 11 a.m. UTC. And while you're waiting, don't forget to visit our sponsors pages to grab virtual swag and enter for a chance to win some great prizes. We're going to see you right after the break. Have a great WordPress Accessibility Day.
Thank you to WordPress Accessibility Day 2023 sponsors. Platinum sponsor, Equalize Digital. Equalize Digital's Accessibility Checker plugin is an automated accessibility scanning tool that helps WordPress websites become and stay accessible. Platinum sponsor, Gravity Forms. Gravity Forms is the professional form builder that you need to create beautiful, powerful, and accessible forms. Gold sponsors: 20i, DQ, Empire Caption Solutions, Pressable, and WP Engine. Silver sponsors: Code Geek, Drake Cooper, GoDaddy, Lone Rock Point, NerdPress, Overnight Website by Kinetic Iris, Riola Networks, A11Y Collective, and The Blogsmith. Bronze sponsors: Accessicart, Green Geeks Web Hosting, Hall Analysis SEO Consulting, HDC, ITX, IvyCat, MetaBox, Pixel Chefs, Simply Schedule Appointments, SiteGround, Termageddon, Underrepresented in Tech, Weglot, and Yoast.